All right, now we're going to talk about a check constraint. Check checks to see if a dollar value or something is greater or less than what we specify. For example, let's say I want to create this table called auto parts. ID, name, and price. All right, so create table parts, and we will say ID. We'll call it a number, and we'll say it takes up to 3 digits. And let's call that we'll give that a unique constraint. That's going to be our unique identifier for the table. So we'll put constraint name, I'll call it UK for unique underscore ID, and then the type, unique. So constraint name, and the type. I'll hit comma and then enter. After ID, we want the part. So the part is going to be the name of the part. So we'll just say part. We'll call that varchar2, 20 characters, nothing special there. And then the price, we're going to do price. The price is going to be a number. We'll take up to, let's say, 6 digits with 2 decimals. But instead of closing out the parentheses and creating a table, what if I only want parts that sell for more than $10? Well, then I'm going to add a check constraint, because a check constraint checks. So constraint name, I'll call it check underscore price. It's going to be a check constraint, and what's it going to check for? Parentheses, it's going to check that price is greater than $10. Semicolon, enter, table created. All right, let's analyze this. So we created 3 columns. This column, and of course the last column. Let's go one at a time. The first column is called ID. It takes up to 3 digits because it's a number data type, and we gave it a constraint, which means it is a unique identifier. We gave it a constraint called unique. It's called the unique key. What that means is whatever value I put for ID for a specific row, you can never use that ID again for another row, because we need to uniquely identify each row. All right, that's the first column. We hit comma. Second column is pretty simple, just a part. That's the name of the column, part. It's varchar2 with 20 characters, variable characters up to 20 digits, up to 20 characters. Comma. Now let's talk about this last column. The last column is called price. The price takes a number with 6 digits total, and 2 of them can be decimal. Then we're adding a constraint. So just like constraint name, constraint type, we're doing constraint name, constraint type. So constraint, okay, constraint name, check price. Doesn't matter what you call it whatever you want. And the type of constraint isn't unique. It isn't primary key. It isn't foreign key. It's check. So once you put the word check, it's going to check whatever you put in these parentheses. What we put in the parentheses is that price must be greater than 10. All right, so let's describe parts. So we have ID, part, and price. ID, part, and price. Select star from parts, and it should be empty because we didn't input anything. All right, so now let's populate it with this information here. So we work at a junkyard, and we're going to populate it with a tire, a door, and a radio. $20, $50, and $5. So we're going to see if our check constraint works. See if it blocks us from putting in invalid data as the purpose of a constraint. Insert into parts values. First one is 1. It's a tire, so I have to put it in quotation marks. And the price is, I believe it said 50 or 20? 20. Semicolon close, enter, 1 row created. All right. Select star from parts. There it is. Item number 1, it's a tire, costs $20, part. So I'm going to hit the up arrow. Instead of having to retype this again, I'm just going to hit the up arrow. And I'm going to say item number 2 is a door. And it's $50. Enter. 1 row created again. If I hit select star from parts, 2 rows selected. We have 2 rows in this table. The last row, we're going to test our check constraint. we're going to input a radio that's $5, and we're going to see if our check constraint that requires price to be greater than 10 actually works. So I'm going to hit the up arrow, and this time it's item number 3. It's a radio, and we'll put $10. No, we're going to put $5. Enter. Let's look at the error message. Error. Check constraint violated. Check constraint violated. So it does work. Now let's say instead we make it 15, and let's see what happens. So we hit the up arrow, and still item 3, it's still a radio, 15. Enter. 1 row created. So it took the 15. It took the 15, select star from parts, and there we go. Now, one thing we didn't go over is how to, well, before we go over what I want to talk about, let's try to violate the unique constraint that we put on column 1. Remember, each ID has to be individual. So let me hit the up arrow, and I'm going to say item number 1. And let's say we also have a door, and let's say this door was $77. If I hit enter, it should not work, and it does not work. Error. Unique constraint violated. Unique. Earlier we violated the check constraint because it was only $5. This time we violated the unique constraint because we tried to put another row in with an ID of 1, but 1 already exists. All right. So it's good to know that the constraints work. Select star from parts. All right. Let's say we did have a part that cost $5. All right. Let's say we had number 4. Let's say number 4, and let's say it was a mirror, and it actually did cost $5, but I really wanted to add it. And let's say we were done with the constraints. Let's talk about dropping a constraint. All right. So the constraint that was violated was called CHK_PRI. Let's say we want to remove this constraint from this table. So what we're going to do is we're going to do alter table, table name, parts, drop constraint, and constraint name, CHK_PRI. Table altered. See that? Table altered. Now, since we took that check constraint off, now let's see if we can input something that's $5, or, in other words, less than $10. So let's hit the up arrow so we get the insert, and we'll do item number 4. It's a mirror, and let's see if $5 works. All right, mirror, $5, 1 row created. There was not a constraint in existence for us to violate the constraint. So if we do select star from parts, now we have a $5 item. All right. Now here's the question of the evening. What if we try to add a constraint to a table where there's data that already violates the constraint that we're trying to add? For example, what if I try to add a constraint that I don't want anything less than $10? So we're going to try to put that constraint back. So to do that, alter table, table name. Remember that. Alter table parts, add constraint, and the constraint name we'll call CHK_price. All right. What kind of constraint is it? The type, check, and it is not case sensitive. I'm just making it case capital just so you can see. And what we're going to check? We're going to check that price is greater than 10. Enter. Look at the error message. Cannot validate the check constraint. The check constraint violated. So we proved that if we already have a constraint on a table, regardless of the type of constraint, whether it's a primary key, unique, foreign key, in this case, check constraint, if we put the check constraint onto a column of a table, we cannot input data that violates that constraint. In addition, we learned the opposite is true also. Once data is inside a table, we cannot try to add a constraint that would violate the data that's already in the table. So in the first case, we had no data in the table, and we tried to add a radio that cost $5, and it violated the constraint. In the second case, we already had an amount of $5 for a mirror in the table. Then we tried to add the constraint. So in one scenario, we tried to add data to a table which already had a constraint. In the second scenario, we tried to add a constraint to a table which already had the data. And as you can see, if it doesn't meet the requirements for the constraint, you won't put the data. It won't allow you to put the data in, as in scenario 1, you can't put the data in. Or in scenario 2, you can't put the constraint on. You can't add the constraint. All right? That's check constraint.